This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 759, and this week we welcome back the intentional restorer, Jon Isaacson. We're going to talk about project management in 2025. Things are changing rapidly. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. We can't do the show without them. And also, I want to mention that stepping up to be our marquee sponsor is the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, the IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at iicrc.org. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report that no one identified 10 as the number of founding members of the National Institute of Rug Cleaning, which was the predecessor organization for RIA, the Restoration Industry Association. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Name the American engineer best known for his development of scientific management and creation of a chart employed on major infrastructure projects, including the Hoover Dam, which continues to be an important tool in project management and program management. Back to you, Joe.
Okay. Joining us today is the intentional restorer. He's a contractor, author, educator, and host of the DYOJO Podcast. The goal of the DYOJO is to help contractors shorten their dang learning curve. Welcome, Jon Isaacson. Always great to see you.
Thank you, Joe.
Jon, project management, 2025. Everything's changing. Like we were talking before the show, Cliff's like, hey, am I going to get the AI notes this week or not? You know, I mean, everything's changing quickly. Why don't you go ahead and start this off with a little background on new things in project management, old things, are old things new, new things old?
The newest innovation in project management just been released within the last few days. Oh. Something everybody should get their notepads out, but the number one thing you need to remember in project management, really in leadership in general, is if you're having an affair with your HR director, don't go to a Coldplay concert.
Oh, that is like, that was such a classic. I can't believe it. I mean,
did you see his apology letter though? You know, I apologize.
Oh, that was worse yet.
Hey,
I didn't write that, brother.
It's an infringement of my right to privacy, you know, to have a public affair on a.
What an idiot.
What arena. But it's kind of funny because I think coming up, you mentioned Luis. He's speaking at the experience coming up in September too. And I think I'm on a panel about innovation. So I was thinking about innovation, and I think, do all of your listeners, are they aware of who Jeff Bezos is? Speaking of other controversial relationships.
Probably not, John. I don't think anyone knows who he is.
For those that aren't aware, you know, the creator of CEO of Amazon. It's funny. I remember there was an interview with him. I don't remember when it was. I looked back up and found an article from Business Insider, but he says people always come to me and ask what's going to be changing in the next 10 years. And he said a real helpful conversation. He goes, I actually think it's the wrong question, because if what we try to do at Amazon is I try to encourage our people to think about what won't change in the next 10 years, and then try to structure your company to focus on those items. And so he said, can you imagine anybody saying, man, I love Amazon. I just wish they would deliver slower, or I wish their prices were higher. So he goes, what do we know? We know they'll always want more selection. They're always going to want it cheaper, and they're always going to want it delivered faster. So rather than wasting time trying to predict what's coming in the future, how do we structure ourselves to do what we know our customers want? And so it's kind of an interesting thing. And then especially as it relates to project management, I think a lot of, I don't remember what the statistics are, but a lot of the companies in property restoration, which I think is companies in general, they're less than 5 million, so they're not running massive operations like a Belfour or something like that. So I think the key innovations, which AI is one of them, we use AI a lot for, it makes us a lot quicker at writing like blogs or, marketing pieces. Almost all of us have gotten in trouble, writing that email back to an adjuster or a customer when we're heated. I think that's one of the best uses of AI is please make this email more professional and less angry. It was pretty amazing how it can adjust just a few things and make your email all of a sudden, just a little bit, maybe not get yourself in as much trouble. And maybe that CEO, if you would have typed into ChatGPT, should I take my girlfriend to Coldplay? Maybe even ChatGPT would have said, yes, but don't be out on the balcony when the kiss cam comes on, so.
John, let me ask you something. You mentioned writing an email, and I think we've all done this. Wrote an email in anger and regretted it. After we hit send, you went,
Oops.
why did I do that? And I read a great book. It was called Lincoln on Leadership. And Lincoln would write a letter and he would put it in his desk drawer and he wouldn't send it out until the next day.
Yeah.
And I wonder now though if we could send that letter, but before we do, we should send it to AI and get some feedback on it. Have you done that? Have you ever seen what happens?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know I'm pissed right now, so I'm gonna throw it in there and say you just put it in there, whatever you wrote, and you say, please make this more professional, and it'll usually keep the tone and most of the words of what you said, and then it'll just adapt it a little bit better.
Which AI do you use?
I've used ChatGPT, and then Grok is the one on X, or what used to be Twitter. And both, honestly, I don't know enough about it to know which one's better. But both are pretty incredible. Like for a blog post, like if most companies are writing real basic generic, we just completed a kitchen remodel in Olympia. And one of the challenging, this is what you're typing into ChatGPT, write a 600-word article highlighting a project that Aries completed in Olympia for a kitchen remodel where we saved the cabinets and replaced the countertops and the floors. And then, it'll pop it out. You have to proofread it because there's definitely some things lost in translation. I did one even where I wanted it to write it in story format, a story format about a fire damage that we repaired, and did a pretty darn good job. And if you read it and you don't really like it, or you want it to tweak it, you can always say, please make it more personal, or please make it more professional, or please shorten this up, or remove all the big words, simplify the language. And it's pretty amazing. So like if you write the shell of something, it can just accelerate that. There's a company here down in Lacey. I think we take it so much for granted that, insurance, that we have this knowledge of insurance. And so they take their scopes of work, they upload a PDF of their scope from Xactimate, and ask it to summarize it in language that a customer would understand. And that's been helpful for them. Just kind of make sure that they're not using contractor or insurance language and assuming people would understand.
So it can take those line item. Is this a line item kind of?
Yeah,
It'll take that and summarize it for you.
Yeah, I haven't tried that personally, but you can upload a PDF apparently, and it'll break it down. So
very interesting. All right, I kind of distracted you a little from the discussion of 2025 project management, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, like those simple, I think those simple modifications, from that standpoint, because we are going to get into scope and whatnot, it might be something for newer project managers or people trying to understand where you could utilize AI to help them, break something down. And I know, Doug from Rare Restoration has been kind of making the circuit. He's using Chat GPT to help people standardize kind of operations for like water damage and things. Like you can apparently, I'm speaking way out of my depth, but you can create your own Chat GPT with your own metrics that you can use within your own company. A lot of people that are saying that that's fairly easy to do. We haven't, I haven't personally done that, but I think the thing to think about AI. What did I just read? No, I was on a podcast where X-ray techs are using AI to think about the most simplified, repetitive activities. And so they're using AI to make the measurements of, say they're measuring like a tumor. I think I'm remembering, not specifically, but something to do with the spine and measuring this tumor. So they can throw that into AI, and then they can actually focus on the parts of interpreting what those measurements mean. So maybe it takes 4 hours out of their day in analysis of the measurement and doing something super technical that a computer probably can do better. And then they can focus on the care part. So I think a lot of people, I personally, one of the things that makes me cringe with innovation, or I think like we said in the email, SOPs is, an SOP is a standard operating procedure. And then a lot of people rely on CRM, customer relationship management, or all these programs. And I'm not knocking them, but they think, I go to this conference, I hear about this technology, I come back and implement it, it's going to solve all my problems. Well, a lot of times it makes the problem worse because you haven't thought the process through. You just throw it to people and say, here, fix this. As opposed to, before you can, create a standard operating procedure, you have to operate those procedures and make sure that you have systems in place and it works, and get the feedback from your team. And a lot of times that process of discussing and tweaking and reviewing, creates the teamwork and those kinds of things, and those pickups. So as it relates to project management, going back to those, like what won't change, I think we know that what won't change as it relates to project management, you always are going to be expected to deliver your project on scope, on budget, and on schedule. Like those are the foundational elements, right? But how often, if we're honestly talking amongst ourselves, do we miss one or more of those marks, or even quite frequently all of those marks? So, in the spirit of Bezos, kind of looking at it from a different perspective. So is it possible to deliver a project on scope, on budget, but off schedule? And I think, again, if we're being honest, this is actually quite common, pretty frustratingly common. Like in the commercial world, if you're off schedule, there's daily penalties, but then that can also cause strained partnerships, loss of future work. In the residential world, we don't typically have those daily penalties, but all the other, loss of trust, bad reputation in a market, and those kinds of things can apply.
Yeah.
Hey, John, if I can interject for a minute, going back to this standard operating procedure idea, all these restoration companies are different, and they have different personnel dynamics. The owners or the leaders in the company are different. They have different strong points, different weak points, and so on and so forth. It seems to me that they're very much like industry standards, and the AICRC writes prescriptive industry standards. You must do this, you must do this, you must do this, must
Yeah.
OSHA, and so on and so
Good.
forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what OSHA does is they have performance-based standards. This is what needs to happen, and they kind of leave it up to the person to kind of get there. So it would seem that using this performance-based outcome, it would seem that's the way that I think companies could, create really good standard operating procedures within their company, because it's based upon them. They know what their strengths are, they know what their weaknesses are, they know what the end goal is.
Yeah.
And having something that's real prescriptive may not apply to them, or everything doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
However, if it's based upon performance, it seems to me that would probably be a superior way to have the company develop it. They could take this basic outline, and this applies to us, this doesn't, this applies to us, it doesn't. We
Yeah.
need to do more of this. And involving the staff and people that have to deliver it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, again, that conversation, that process, right? So like the IRCRC standards, I think you brought that up. Pete's brought that up. I know a lot of your guests bring that up. Like it's the baseline, right? It's just a starting point. It's not the end all. And the performance based, yeah, I think I guess how to articulate that, like you have to, the process of working through the process is what is important. And a lot of times if you start with a CRM, your whole adaptation is to that CRM because you've invested in it, you've bought it, and then you've got to make that system work. And the beauty about all those, if you get behind the story of them, is a lot of them have started in our industry. So it's someone looking at a particular issue and then creating a program, like even Xactimate, right? Like it was like trying to create a standardized price list. Those of us that remember, you used to go to Home Depot and get the RS Means books, and it
right,
only updated once a year, right? And it
right,
told you for this area, these are the high, medium, low, these are the different factors, da 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 da. Well, Xactimate put that in a computer program, and you can argue all you want about whether it's right or wrong. It solved one issue, right, and created or opened up a whole new host of them. And so some of those CRMs that people use, and unfortunately, I use those interjectively because it seems to be whenever someone's talking about an SOP, they're usually talking about integrating a CRM, and and it just whoever created it typically was focusing on one element, and if you understand what they were focusing on, then that can be helpful. A lot of companies in restoration do program work, where they're working with Alacrity or Contractor Connections. So those kind of integrations where you can enter a note in one system and it filters that to all the different platforms that you might be working on, that at least reduces some duplication for you. Um, Another issue always is getting data from the field, whether you're doing mitigation or repairs or both. And so, it being shareable in real time. There's a lot going on right now where like people are trying to create the CRM that integrates with an SOP so that a technician working in the field can't get past a certain benchmark unless they complete a benchmark, which in principle sounds wonderful. But like if there's any owners or managers out here that are looking at CRMs out like that, go use it in the field yourself first because they're frustrating as hell, when you get stuck on something, not because you're not doing it right, just because you're not doing it in the sequence, that the program dictates. I remember an early one we tried to onboard at one of the larger companies in the industry, and they promised, that you could take for content, so you could take photos in the field and they would upload. Well, if you didn't have good Wi-Fi, which when you're working in a burnt out building, unless you're bringing your own Wi-Fi, a lot of times you're packing the contents out before the power's there, so you don't even have that option. It would just slow us up. So, there was plenty of times where I'll tell you one innovation, which was actually going backwards. We onboarded that contents program, and this is over 15 years ago, but it wouldn't upload. It was slow. And then downloading on the computers we had at the office, it was actually so much faster to have the crews in the field do all the contents documentation by paper. And then we found this gal online that did piecework. This is the early days of, contract work, or what's the term? Piecework, um, where people are
Yeah.
working from home.
Yeah.
So we would scan in the handwritten things, send them over to her, and she would put them nicely in our Excel spreadsheets. And I think we either paid, I think we paid by the page, and it ended up being, nice little side work for her. And we, like everyone knows, you get like three of them in a row where you're going contents heavy, and then you might not have one for a little while. And so it was great. There wasn't the pressure to have someone on staff. And then when we did have it, we just sent it over. And so that was, you could call it innovation. It solved a real issue. It kept us going quicker, by actually doing it what most people would view as slower, but that was more a conversation within the team to like, this computer program as it stands right now is slowing us way up. Whereas if we can just write it by hand, we can cruise through, send it over to our lady. She makes it look all nice, and then that's what we send off to the insurance company. So there, I mean, that integration, there might be something if you can upload that by PDF. Maybe AI can do that now. I don't do contents now, so I wouldn't have a reason to test it. Um, but yeah, that I mean, kind of does that answer your question, Cliff, or coincide with what you're thinking of? I mean, you said prescriptive versus performative. Um,
Well, I think it does, and again, I think everyone, the bottom line is it's kind of hard when you have this checklist, and
yeah,
every fire is different, and every company is different. So it
yeah,
seems like having a checklist where you have to check all these boxes may not be applicable to the company, may be not applicable to the employee, may not be applicable to the project.
yeah,
Versus, this is the goal. We want a happy customer. We got to get it done on time. We got to get it done on budget. We have to communicate, and so on and so forth. So it would seem to me that, within a company, not everyone is a great communicator. Who's going to be
yeah,
the communicator, and, who's going to be the bearer of bad news or the teller of bad news, and, who's
yep,
going to collect the money, and so on
yep,
and so forth. So I think that, every company, if you begin like Covey said, begin with the end in mind, it would seem to me that it might be easier. And to take what someone did in their company, I understand how it could be very, very effective, particularly in a large conglomerate company, Belfor, ATI, some of these other companies. But every one of their branches is a little bit different. You're trying
yeah,
to, it's like the Marine Corps. You're trying to conform everybody to, having short hair,
yeah, yeah.
being patriotic, all this other stuff. And, sometimes it fits in and sometimes it doesn't. So,
Well, I think that's the beauty. Like you look at like say like a McDonald's, right? It's a bunch of repetitive items, so those can be streamlined or robots or AI elements of that. Whereas what
right,
like what you said with what we do, it's different.
right,
That I can remember a commercial project we had with for a fire where typically, you seal off the source room and you deal with that first, or else you're just spreading contaminants, and then you work your way, to the least affected areas. Well, for this particular commercial fire, it made more sense to seal it off. We created a bubble. We had to get some elements of their operation back up and running.
right,
And so it took, if you think about what we had the conversation, thankfully at that time you could have a conversation with the adjuster and the customer, but like, hey, we're going to do this completely bass backwards,
right,
and it's going to cost more in labor,
right,
but it's going to get them back up and
right.
running, so you're
It's
not
right.
paying for the loss
Business,
of
yeah,
business.
interruption, right,
So ultimately the cost will spike, even out, and then actually drop,
right,
and so yeah, but that's whereas if you go and you're like, well, you have to do it this way every time, then that creates issues. I think another thing though, as it relates to like standard operating procedures, it still surprises me. And what you were talking about, Cliff, how many companies don't have like a regular weekly meeting with their teams to talk about ongoing projects, lessons learned, go through. um, all the jobs, and then have, it was funny. I was hired by a company, a very large company, and they said the prior manager of their division um, didn't do well on training. So I go in, and the first week I pull everybody offline. I think we did. I think almost always on my career we've done them on Thursdays. Thursday mornings, from 8 to 10 is going to be our meeting, and we're going to go through every job we have, and we're going to talk through it, and then have a training topic. And then once a month we'll have a larger meeting. And so the first time we had it, the my manager came in and was like, "What are you guys doing?" And like, "We're doing training. You told me we were supposed to do training. This is how I've always done it. This is what we discussed in my interview." And then they're like, "If you have 8 people in a room for an hour, you're losing, X number of dollars." And I was like,
Right.
"Well, yeah, but if we keep doing it the way the last guy did it, we're losing, thousands of dollars."
Right.
So, which one is it? And so I mean, just that, again, the internal process, even if you are doing SOPs or doing CRM or whatever heck you want to call it, it's like sitting down with the team, reviewing it, what's working, what's not working. What did we learn last week from this project? And it's tricky too, because um, you have to create a culture where you can hear negative things, because if the minute somebody brings something up and you're just on them and blaming them, it's funny to me. I go into a lot of companies to either fix issues or get something restarted. And almost always the thing that you have to change in a culture is the finger pointing. As long as there's finger pointing, you're never going to get to the root of any issues, because it's just always people blaming each other to cover their butts. Whereas if you can start to get that we mentality, hey, if a project goes bad, it looks bad on all of us, and we're not necessarily like, obviously, if you purposely do something wrong, we got to talk about that. But in general, we're more looking at like, hey, we screwed up on this one. What can we learn from it so we don't do it again? We did great on this one. And again, the praise, right? It goes the same way. Hey, we all did great on this one. And it's pretty wild. I mean, how common some of those issues are. How come it's inconsistent? Well, we don't do training on a regular basis. How come we can never solve an issue? Well, when we talk about issues, we always look to blame rather than actually like work through it. So,
I think that the importance of communication. It's like really important. And after this show, as you know, I'm going to write a blog. Okay, and I'm going to write a blog as to what I think you said, Jon.
okay.
And it's amazing. I do this like almost every week, and I take these notes. I hear what they say. Sometimes I don't. I do the best I can to record it accurately. I
Yeah.
turn around, I send a draft blog to these people, and sometimes they come back. It's excellent. We don't need to make any changes. Another time, it comes back and they change everything. Like they rewrite everything, and it's not what they said, but it's what they think they said. Okay.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
Okay. And so I once heard this adage that the truth is no longer the truth once two people know it. So the two of us walk away from this radio show thinking two different things. I think you said this, you think that. Everyone in the audience may think something different. And
Yeah.
the key to it is really this importance of communication. And you talked about using the AI in order to take these technical construction terms and making it so that the customer can understand it. But maybe you could use AI to make it so everyone can understand it, and get. And I've never tried to do that, but it would seem to me that AI might be able to accomplish it because it doesn't have a bias, and
Right.
I think all of us tend to have a bias, and supposedly it kind of gets smarter as it does it over and over and over again.
Well, or arguably it's getting dumber, right? Because it's creating its answers based on what we all say. So,
And the interesting thing is, and I think that you demonstrated this, but I'm not sure that a lot of people know that some of the highest paying jobs today that deal with AI are not the people that are writing the programming and the algorithms. It's the people that are framing the questions.
Yeah.
They make huge money. How
Yeah.
do you frame the question in order to get AI to give you the answer that the client is looking for? And I
Yeah.
think you just gave some excellent ways of doing that, personalize it and take the anger out of it and so on and so forth. I think those are some really, really effective tips. But we're close to halftime, Joe.
Yeah, let's stop and thank our sponsors. We'll be right back. We've got the intentional restorer, Jon Isaacson, talking about project management in 2025 and a few other topics. Asian sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at eia-usa.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high-quality, full-service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com. All right, let's get back. Cliff, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, John. Okay, while scope, time, and budget are key components of a restoration project, there's some other things that are important that can determine whether there's success and failure. And what might you think they would be, John?
First of all, Cliff, how dare you? That's not what I said.
Okay.
I was just feeding off of what you said. I was thinking, can I just say before we go there, like you
Sure.
mentioned communication. I can't remember who said the quote, but it's communication is not what you think you said, but it's what they heard.
Right.
And I think that is really helpful. I get frustrated a lot because I think I try to articulate clearly, and then a customer or team members, or an adjuster, complete, or like you're saying, where it's like, wait a minute, that's not what I said. But it's, and maybe like you're saying, maybe AI can help with some of that, especially if you're writing a training. Maybe it's good, dump it into AI, make sure this is helpful for beginning level, employees or something like that. And then two, one thing, as I was talking a little bit about SOPs. If you're creating an SOP, it might be helpful. Here's a jumbled mess of things that we're thinking about for this particular SOP. Please make this into something more formal. That might be a helpful way. So to go to your question, the scope, budget, and schedule. What's interesting to me, how easy you can miss on those marks, and then how internally I always try to think of, that's primarily what our company does. We do repairs, we subcontract out a lot. So it's very important and we also hire people. I see a lot in the industry where people hire old subcontractors, people that have been subcontractors for a long time, and then hire them as subject matter experts to be project management. And personally, I think in our industry, especially as it relates to insurance, a lot of what we do is more customer service than it is project management. Estimating in our industry is more data input than it is estimating, because when you estimate, you go out, you say, what's your budget? What are my materials? What are my costs? What's my labor going to be? And then I have to put an estimate together that I think reflects the scope and the cost of what that project is going to be. Whereas if I go out and I gather the data from the field and I put it into a data program like Xactimate, like Symbility or Cotality, whatever they're calling it now, or these T&M programs, we're really just transferring data in one form to data in an estimating form, and it's creating basic pricing that we then create a production process from. So, really that's a client expectation, client management. Hey, your insurance did or didn't cover this. This is the selections that you can make that are within your price range. And unless you want to pay more money, this is what you have to deal with. And so a lot of that is more customer service. So old contractors that have been doing it their way for forever and think very highly of their technical skills, while they're not wrong, that doesn't typically translate into customer service skills. And so, and can be very frustrating, right? Well, this is what should be done. Yes, that is what should be done, but this is, unless the customer is going to pay for it, this is the scope of work as it relates to this policy. So knowing the scope, I don't know if you guys have read the book. There's a really good book. Will this come up? When Words Collide. It's by Bill Wilson, Resolving Insurance Coverage and Claims Disputes. And so he wrote that from a standpoint of insurance agents. He doesn't say this, but I would, a lot of insurance agents don't know what they're selling as it relates to policies. A lot of insurance companies don't do their underwriting anymore. And so he has a saying, read the full policy, RTFP. So if you're in a PG crowd, it's read the full policy. If you're in a PG-13 crowd, it's read the effing policy, right?
Right.
And that oftentimes solves the issue. And the same thing applies in construction. Read your damn scope. Like what we contracted to as a project manager, if you can't tell me what is and is not a part of your scope, you're going to set yourself and your team up for failure, right? You should know. Customer starts having a conversation. Well, I'd really like to do this. Well, that's not in your full scope, right? So do you want to pay for that? No. Sorry, we're not going to do that. Move on. Do you want to pay for that? Great. Change order. Or we distinguish between supplements and change order. A supplement is something that relates to the contracted scope of work that maybe is now a part of discovery. We discovered something. It's a legitimate part of the claim. So we need to talk to the insurance company, or it's a legitimate part of the project. So unfortunately, we need to have that conversation about additional cost. And then change order, just for our company, is a request, right? I want to upgrade from laminate to solid surface. But if the project manager doesn't know their scope, then they don't know if that's a supplement or a change order. That causes delays, causes a lot of frustration, and it's unnecessary. Know your scope.
Hey, Sean, going back to the policy again, like reading the policy. I've had insurance from a number of different insurance. I mean, I'm 75, so I've had homeowners insurance from, I don't know, 10 or 15 different insurance companies over the years. And when they say read the policy, I could read it, but I don't necessarily understand it because, attorneys wrote it for other attorneys. But I have seen some tendency towards State Farm and other companies that make the policy a lot more understandable. Like they have pictures in there, pictorials, and so on. It's but the bottom line is, it's like a 6-year-old or whatever can understand it. They can read it and they can see it versus all this legalese, in the event of this, or this is not covered and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Well, I think, just maybe like a personal tangent, I am not a fan of contractors pretending that they're policy experts.
Right.
And we had Andy McCabe on a long time ago, and he mentioned getting in trouble in Oregon for basically practicing public adjusting as a contractor, that's a whole separate license and whatnot. This book, just to be clear, is for insurance agents and kind of, in my opinion, calling them out for not knowing what the heck they're selling. So I don't think, I think a contractor could encourage a customer to say, hey, if this doesn't make sense to you, ask your insurance company to tell you in the policy where that is part of the policy. Because as a contractor, I think we need to do this, and this is why. So I think our part is like scope or structure, let the structure speak. I think we get way out of our element. I think I wrote an article not that long ago in CNR about let the structure speak. And I think there's a lot of people in the industry that say our job is to support the customer. Well, homeowners also commit fraud, and whether knowingly or unknowingly. So we shouldn't be party to that. Like, we're not inflating claims. Like, what does the structure need? As a contractor, what do we need to do to properly dry it, clean it, and put it back to resemble pre-loss conditions? And then if the homeowner feels that that doesn't accurately reflect the scope that the contractor's telling them, or the cost isn't realistic, that's a conversation they need to have. Unless you're a public adjuster or somebody's involved, policy is really between the customer and their insurance company. But just like you're saying, the same would does apply to the contractor. We write this document, this estimate, and whether it was a well-written estimate or not, I have a few books that might help in that realm. A small plug, but when it comes to the project manager, if you do not know your scope inside and out, you're an idiot. Like, you shouldn't be a project manager. And maybe that's part of the communication and the training. I've also been a part of companies where you have just too many projects to be that effective. You're just praying none of the fires explode, right? You're just always putting out fires, but to the best of your ability, I would argue the busier you are, the more important it is to try to set some time aside to know your scope, because then you can, all right, no, yes, 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 hold. That goes back to the estimator. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, going back to the policy, knowing what's in the policy, it's, I would think many of the people that, in the business have a pretty good idea of what their insurance coverage is and what it is not.
Sure.
One of the things that Martin King said to do, and I remembered it, and I've done it, and it's worked quite well, is if you're changing insurance companies or you're putting your insurance out for bid through a broker or whatever, to actually write a couple of sentences. This is what we do in our business. We clean, we paint, we may make a roof repair. We don't tear off roofs or whatever. And you tell them exactly what you do. And you say, does my policy or does what you propose cover me for these activities? And ask for it to get it back in writing. And by doing that, you know what you can do, you know what you can't, where the potential errors and omissions are going to be, and so on and so forth. And,
you're talking about for your company's insurance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
hey, let's bring in the restoration industry's global watchdog and start the roundup a little early today, because it's great to have Pete on for these shows, and I know Jon and Pete go a little ways back. Grayson, can you start us up on the roundup, buddy? All right, the roundup brought to us by Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. We've got the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. Pete, I know you wanted to jump in here and say a few things, so let's have it.
Yeah, so I took a bunch of notes. This is kind of a conversational type show. It's a little bit different when in the past where we have formal interview questions, and it's kind of good. So I've kind of just been enjoying the dialogue between Cliff and Jon going back and forth. But I took a couple of notes and pointed, at the heart of everything, I'm a historian. So all the points and everything that these guys talk about, I don't always know what I'm going to want to say until I hear something, and then I bring it in historical context. But I want to start off with things that are in the news very recently. So Pittsburgh is known as the Steel City because that's where they made steel. And but now I think Pittsburgh might become the heart of the AI world. So they just had this big meeting with all these companies. They're going to donate all this money, and they want to build everything. Was just in Pittsburgh the other day. So Mike Rowe was on the news this morning. He was at that meeting, and so there's a lot of concern now that AI is going to start taking people's jobs away, and robots are going to be doing stuff. But the interesting point that Mike Rowe brought up was he said they're coming for the white collar workers first, not the blue collar workers. So what this brings me to is the point of a lot of the points that John brought up today and Cliff have been talking about. So there was an article in CNR magazine in their digital format that came out 2 days ago. And Joe, I don't know, Joe, if I sent you the link, but I'll do it after the show. But I did send the link to Cliff, sent it to John, Ken Larson, a few other friends of mine who I thought would really enjoy the article. There's so much stuff that comes at us that you can't read everything. What I look for is a title of something that catches my eye, and then I'll scan it quickly. And if it gets my attention, I'll read the article. I did this. I read the entire article, and I don't do that often. And I want to quote something here that's going to bring this entire show into perspective. And this is from the article. So the title of the article is Undeserved Job Titles Are Killing Restoration, and It's Time to Fix It. And here, this is the second paragraph, very short and sweet, which sums it up and validates everything we're talking about. The author says, he talked about some dumb stuff, and then he says, let's fast forward to 2025. Title of the show, Project Manager 2025. He says, let's be blunt. Titles have become watered down. The industry is flooded with, in quotations, project managers who have never managed a budget, estimators who don't know a truss from a T-bar, and technicians who are little more than equipment movers. Right? Now, what's that? Why did this article resonate with me? As I listened to the author make his case throughout the article and saying the industry needs to fix it, essentially, it reminded me of what I think he was advocating for was to get back to the basic and essentials of how the industry was when Cliff and myself were active in the industry and grew up in the 80s and the 90s of actually being hands-on in the field. And the first article that I ever wrote myself was something that I wrote for John Downey when he owned CleanFacts. And it was called the lead restoration technician is the heart and soul of any restoration company, because that's the person who's actually on the ground, physically doing the work and having the most contact with anybody that actually comes to the project. And I right around that time, this was the mid to late 90s, there was in the remodeling industry, NARI, which is the remodeling group under the National Home Builders, they had a concept called the lead carpenter. And they talked about the lead carpenter is the skilled person in doing a renovation project on a job. And I kind of got from that article that maybe it's time for us as an industry to get back to that. You know, the estimators, probably the people that AI will affect most in our industry will be estimators, because if they're just data entry clerks, AI will do that. I don't think they're going to be able to replace lead technicians who are actually on jobs unless they're going to be putting robots out there to reposition air movers and take moisture readings. And I wouldn't be out of it. Mike Rowe said, he goes, it's not that the blue collar workers may not be susceptible to this, but he said, but they'll come way later. It's the white collar guys that are going to be on the front end that would be most at risk from the AI.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, if I can interject, okay. Back in the day, okay, when we went out on a water loss or we went out on a fire loss, who called the shots? We did.
The person who was on the field, right?
Correct. Yeah. We called the shots. Okay. Now, you know, what's happened is we're not calling the shots anymore. You know, for instance, if I wanted to dry a building, I could rent large desiccant equipment. I could open the windows. I could use calcium chloride. I had all these different options. All these options have been taken away. Our industry has become commoditized. They tell you how many air movers, they tell you where to put them. They tell you take this reading. They tell you to take that reading. So what happens is the creativity, the individuality really has been removed by our industry. And we've kind of gone along with it. We just let this happen. And
Right.
I, in all honesty, I don't believe that we can go back and regain what we had before. I don't believe that's ever going to happen now. And
Well,
I think,
look, Cliff, to further build on what you said, who called the shots? 80% of the time, depending on your company structure and how it was set up and what are the people in the field. But me personally, I mean, there's two models for project management that I talked about for years when I used to guest lecture at Purdue. You either have the cradle to grave project manager who does everything from estimating to completion, or you have the estimating and production manager model, where you have a sales component to the project and then you have a delivery component. And both are useful and work in the industry. Either one could work. What I used to do as a project manager, I trusted my lead technicians to let me know when they thought I actually needed to go out to the job. And what I found out on a lot of these routine water damages, it was only about 20% of the time. So it became much more cost efficient, because this gets back to what John was saying. I invested in training the lead technicians to be smart enough to know how to make the calls. And if they thought there was an issue with the customer, with an adjuster, they said, Pete, you need to come out to this one. And back then, that was before the digital age. But a lot of times they would take Polaroid pictures, bring the pictures in when we would have the meetings at the end of the day or the morning of the next day when we reviewed our jobs. And then we would make determinations of where we're going to go with it. So, and I think a lot of companies back in the day probably ran like that until all these changes started taking place to where we are today. I agree. I don't think we're going to go back to the old school, but I think we could have a happy blend where we have some of that comes back, but we also have to apply, deal with what's going on. A couple other things I took in some notes as I was listening to you guys talk in the first part of the show. John talked about one of the things that we have to get away from to be more effective is finger pointing. And, Jim Collins brought this up in Good to Great when he analyzed a lot of these companies. And they used a comparison between Japanese and American. He says in Japan, they have this philosophy, either we failed or we succeeded, where in America, it was more about I. And everybody knows that there's no I in team. And this all lends to the finger pointing. So Collins said that the really effective companies in the Good to Great model that he analyzed in his study, they had a thing called autopsy without blame. And I think that that's one of the things he was kind of referencing to without saying that, is that if you have a project, if something goes wrong, let's just take a look at it as a group and not say who screwed up, but how did the company screw up? Where did the project go wrong? And I think that this is it. And I think this is a good principle. I think that we should probably be embraced. The other thing with this training, I actually know who John was talking about, the company. I suspect I might. I'm not going to bring up who it is. But a lot of these companies, I don't know that they put the value on training. In other words, it's a difference between short-term and long-term thinking. In the short term, they may seem that they're losing money because they don't have guys out there doing billable work. But in the long term, if they keep screwing up and making these mistakes, it's going to cost them a lot more money, right? Which is, there's never enough money to do it right the first time, but always twice as much money later to kind of correct the problem. Well, so now we're going to go back to one of the symposiums of the 90s, Cliff, that you were at, where we had that panel with Bill Bonds. It's a DKI guy.
right.
And it was very famous in the industry because he had a project that was, I don't know, probably a $1,500 little residential water damage loss.
Right. I know what you're talking about. I was the.
Yeah, I know you were.
Right.
And he got sued, and what he found out was it was a professional claimant. This guy had put a piece of glass in a restaurant and sued a restaurant, but it couldn't be brought up in this trial because it would be prejudicial. And the guy came in and he said he was harmed on this water loss from some fogging procedures that were done that were standard at the time, and he had the oxygen tank and everything. And the claim against him, the award was this was all back in the OJ time, so they tended to the juries get big settlements. It was double of what the insurance coverage he had. Now, there were two major companies in the industry that were involved with their products, chemical companies, two very well-known companies. It's public record, but that's the point I'm going to make. It's not essential. Both of those chemical companies were absolved of any responsibility. All the responsibility came back because the company that was doing the job, the helper went out alone to check on the job. And the case they made was the guy was untrained to do the procedure. I don't necessarily think it was true, but the company got busy. They had two-man crew, and he sent the helper out because he thought he was qualified. Well, what that brought to the industry all those years ago was the importance of training, because the whole thing was based on training. So the guy wasn't properly trained to do the work that he was supposed to do. All right. And that jerked the chain in the industry for a long time. But as we change through generations, I think we forget, we don't go back to history to learn those lessons of the importance. And I think that's a key point that John was making.
Okay. Yeah, okay, wait, one thing. I think the reason, Pete, that it was a jury trial, and the reason that the award was given was that Bill Bond, they had an expert witness for the policyholder who was supposedly injured and so on and so forth. And what happened is Bill Bond's attorney ripped this guy a new butthole from top to bottom because he caught him in perjury and all this other stuff and so on and so forth. And actually the jury felt sorry. They polled the jury, and the jury felt sorry for the expert witness after the defendant's attorney got done with him, and that's why they.
Well,
that's why they gave the award. No, I'm not.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm saying, but that's just a preposterous, and it's the wrong reason.
I understand.
But I'll tell you that the guy who was the lead technician on that project, a year before, those were the years I was working for Dry's, in Southern California, he came to my WRT class, and I'm the guy who actually certified the guy.
Understood.
Now, I didn't do that with the helper because the helper was a new guy. I'd only been in the project for 2 weeks. But anyway, I guess the case was made that they thought that was the weak point, and that's what they went after. I mean, I think it was all BS. But,
no, they went after everything, but they
went after everything. But right, that was the one point where they absolved the chemical manufacturers, and they blamed it on the contracting team because of the training angle, if you would. I think another thing that Jim Collins brought up in Good to Great in his concepts of the hedgehog concept and the 3 circles of simplicity is he talked about the and then also the built to last, the predecessor, is the use and application of technology, any kind of technology that dates back for years. And he said certain companies are early adopters and others aren't. And part of that depends on what their business strategy and what their core strengths are. So you don't necessarily have to automatically be an early adopter. I mean, a lot of times early adopters are the ones who are the risk takers who go in and, they get the slings and the arrows, and then you kind of learn from that. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting times that we're in, and things are kind of changing very quickly. The other thing, Cliff, that you kind of brought up, this whole conversation you and John had right after we took the halftime break, was about what somebody said and what they actually meant and what somebody thought they meant. Now, this all comes out of the Covey stuff is habit 5, seek first to understand, then be understood. I remember years ago when I went to go actually see Covey in person, he talked about the toughest of all the habits was habit 5, was that habit. And this reminded me, and something that Marty said in the CR class that you and me were in 1988, and it was actually a question on a CR test. And Marty had a question that said, why should a certified restorer, and I think the analogy is anyone who's at the top of the field in whatever profession is, why should they learn how to say certain things, how to put certain things in context? And the correct answer to the question, at least from Marty's viewpoint, was, do you remember what the answer was, Cliff?
No, I probably got it wrong, but that's
no, okay. I don't know. The answer to the question was so that when you are misquoted, you could very vigorously deny that it's something I would never have said. Years later, in the mid to late 90s, or actually in the early 2000s, when I was still an active project manager, after I left Dry Eads and before I went into full-time consulting, I was on a project. One of my lead technicians went out to the project. I wasn't on the project, and a customer said to the technician at the end when we were going through the final walkthrough that Pete said this. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the technician said, "Well, ma'am, are you sure Pete said that? I don't think that he would have said that. He may have said this, this, or this." And the customer said, "I think you're right." And what happened is they just were confused and they misunderstood it. Now, that's a true story. I'm not making it up, but it lends to the importance. If it's very hard to put words in the mouth of an attorney, a doctor, or a CPA, those three professions, or even the other two classes of professions, are architects and engineers. It's hard to put words in their mouth. And if you misquote them, they'll say, "Nope, that's not what I said. Nope," and they'll be very specific about that. So I think knowing and understanding that skill that John is talking about, that's the clearest part of communication. And that was Covey's point of habit 5, is that if you get into a discussion with someone, and let's say you have differing viewpoints, one person talks. Before the second person can talk, they need to repeat to that person's satisfaction, "This is what I said." And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times before you actually got it right, because the people were not listening to what was being said. They were formulating their response. And while you're trying to formulate a response, you can't really understand what the other person's saying. And that's kind of a communication breakdown. Probably the final little point that I made from my notes here is John was talking about letting the structure speak. And that reminds me of our friend Mickey Lee.
right.
I used to teach the project management course with Mickey Lee and Mike Bowden for several years. And Mickey had, one of the concepts that I introduced to the industry in 2000 was the idea of the restoration triangle, that you have a relationship between the homeowner, property owner, the insurance company, and the restoration contractor. And sometimes you had these third parties that were involved. Eventually we called them IEPs, but they were just third parties that came in for a variety of reasons on a project, usually experts on some topic. And one of the things that Mickey said, his angle on the whole thing was, he said, we should let the project speak for itself. In other words, it doesn't matter necessarily what the customer thinks, per se, not exactly, or the contractor, or even the insurance. Doesn't matter whether there's coverage or not coverage. It doesn't matter what the customer wants or doesn't want. Like John said, is this a legitimate supplemental, or is it just a want and desire that would require a change order? What matters is, what does the project need? And if we concentrate on the project as being the center of the attention, yeah. I think Mickey advocated for this in the years that he chaired the S500. He says, if we do what the project needs, it satisfies everybody who is in the restoration triangle. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And that's kind of the main point that John made. So
good
this
way
whole
to sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing with project management is so key. And to get back to that article that was written by this fellow named Scott Masura, I'm connected with him on LinkedIn. He sent me a connection request about 2-3 years ago. I don't think I've ever met him. I followed some of his articles. We have over 200 mutual connections, which is one of the reasons why I connected with him. But I read his resume on LinkedIn, and over the last 20 years, he's had 14 different positions, and he's worked for some of the most major companies in our industry. It's very interesting. He's kind of paid his dues by kind of coming up the ladder to where he is today. It's interesting now that he says, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem, and it's time for the industry to fix it. And if the industry allowed ourselves to get into this position, like Cliff talked about, where we've drifted, where we don't call the shots anymore, I think we can fix it. Doesn't mean we're going to get back to the way it was, but knowing where we came from and how we can apply those lessons to the problems we have today to create a better future, that's the key, because it's always about making things better for the future. So I like the article. I hope that a guy agrees to do an interview on the show on that topic in that article. I think it'd be useful, and I think it would be interesting to our listeners. And
Thank
with
you,
that,
Pete.
I'll pass it back to you guys.
Much appreciated, John. Before we close things up, I want to give Cliff a word and then have you jump in and and do the final word.
I don't have anything else. I've said my pieces.
All right, John, wrap it up for me, buddy.
Man, I thank you for having me on. I think I've told you guys before, but when I got started, I think I got started in 2002. I remember when you guys were on internet radio. And so my favorite things was IAQ radio, trying to tune into that, and then the big IE Connections magazine, that came out like the newspaper, those when I was trying to learn and trying to, educate myself, those were two pieces that felt like drinking from a fire hose. So I really appreciate what you all do, and it's my little restoration up and comer fanboys, just really appreciative to be on the show, and thank you everyone for sticking around and let me share a little bit of what I've learned.
Where can people go to check out your books, maybe order a book, John?
Yeah, the DYOJO, DYOJO.com is my website, and then all the books are on Amazon. So
DYOJO.com. All right. Always great to catch up with you. It was nice to see you down in where the heck were we? Florida. Some part of Florida. Some part of Florida. This is Radio Joe saying thanks to this week's guest. I want to thank Jon Isaacson, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Slotnick, the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli, Grayson Gone Fishing Fisher at the controls, and most importantly, our sponsors and loyal audience. We'll be back next Friday at noon live for the next edition of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.